Mohamed Salah, one of the biggest football stars in the world, is admired for his incredible talent and genuine humility. But what happens when this global icon walks into a high-end New York City restaurant, dressed simply, and is treated as if he doesn't belong? Where are you watching from today? We love hearing from you. This is the story of how a simple act of kindness changed a life. The shrill alarm clock blared at 5:30 a.m., ripping Mary Johnson from the few precious hours of sleep she'd managed to snatch. She glanced at her mother, still asleep on the worn-out couch in their tiny apartment. The weight of the world, in the form of ever-mounting medical bills, pressed down on Mary. Every penny she earned at the restaurant went straight into keeping their heads above water. She quickly dressed in her neatly pressed uniform, a simple black and white ensemble, and tied her dark hair into a practical ponytail. Grabbing her bag, she whispered a quiet, "Goodbye, Mama," and stepped out into the chilly New York morning. The crisp air bit at her cheeks, a stark reminder of the fall weather. At the Gilded Spoon, the restaurant where she worked, the routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Greet customers, take orders, and, above all, avoid any mistakes that could ignite the fiery temper of Mr. Harrison, the perpetually stressed manager. The place was a magnet for wealthy business people, A-list celebrities, and those ever-present influencers, all of whom expected absolute perfection, served with a side of fawning admiration. Halfway through her shift, a man entered. He was dressed simply, worn sneakers, faded jeans, and a dark hoodie pulled low over his head. He didn't look like the usual clientele, and Mary instantly noticed the subtle whispers and sideways glances from the other waiters. Some even pointedly ignored him. But Mary, bless her heart, wasn't one for prejudice. Without hesitation, she grabbed a menu and walked over. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide?" The man looked up, and a warm, genuine smile spread across his face. "Just water for now, thank you," he replied. His voice was calm, polite, a stark contrast to the entitled drawl she often encountered. Mary nodded and walked away, but a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. The other waiters were watching her with open disapproval, and Mr. Harrison's glare was already boring a hole in her back. Mary didn't care. She had always believed in treating people with kindness, no matter their background, their clothes, or their perceived social standing. Little did she know that this simple act of respect was about to change everything. Mary could feel the weight of their stares, heavy as lead, pressing against her as she walked back to the kitchen. The other waiters whispered amongst themselves, exchanging knowing glances, as if she had committed some unforgivable sin. She glanced over her shoulder and saw Mr. Harrison, his arms crossed, his expression tight with disapproval. The lines around his mouth were deep, like canyons carved by years of stress and dissatisfaction. She grabbed a glass, filled it with ice water, and returned to the table. The man was looking out the window, lost in thought, seemingly oblivious to the tension he was causing. When she placed the glass in front of him, he looked up, that same warm smile gracing his features. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Mary smiled back, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Of course, take your time." Before she could step away, a familiar grating voice called out from behind her, "Mary!" She turned to see Mr. Harrison approaching, his usual fake smile plastered on his face, the one he reserved for customers he deemed worthy. But the way he looked at the man sitting at the table was anything but friendly. It was the look of a hawk sizing up a field mouse. "Sir, are you sure this is the right place for you?" Mr. Harrison asked, his tone dripping with condescension, each word laced with subtle venom. The man tilted his head slightly, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "I think so," he replied, his voice calm and measured. Unless I walked into the wrong restaurant. Mary's stomach clenched. She wanted to disappear. Not at all. She interjected quickly, her voice a little too high-pitched. He's a guest, just like anyone else. Mr. Harrison barely acknowledged her. I just want to make sure our customers feel comfortable, he continued, his voice smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. This is a fine dining establishment. The man studied him for a moment, a quiet intensity in his gaze, then nodded slowly. I understand, he said. He picked up the menu, flipping through it casually. I'll have the grilled salmon, please. Mary wrote down the order without hesitation, her hand steady despite the tremor in her heart. But as she turned, she caught the way Mr. Harrison's jaw clenched. He wasn't happy. Not happy at all. Walking back to the kitchen, Sarah, her co-worker and friend, grabbed her arm. Are you crazy? She whispered urgently, her eyes wide with alarm. Mary frowned, a crease forming between her brows. For what? Doing my job? Sarah sighed, a mixture of exasperation and pity in her voice. You know how Harrison is. He doesn't like, well, people who don't look like they belong here. Mary shook her head in frustration. That's ridiculous. But deep down, she knew Sarah was right, and she had a sinking feeling, a cold dread in the pit of her stomach that things were about to get much, much worse. As she served the man's meal, she noticed the atmosphere in the restaurant shift. The murmurs grew louder, more insistent. Some customers shot disapproving looks in his direction, their faces pinched with disdain. Mary had no idea that in just a few moments, her life would take an unexpected turn, a sharp left into uncharted territory, one she could never have prepared for. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, building like a summer thunderstorm, ready to burst. The moment Mary placed the plate of perfectly grilled salmon in front of the man, the disapproving whispers intensified, swirling around the restaurant like a noxious fog. She tried to ignore them, to focus on the task at hand, but it was impossible. She could sense the judgmental stares from both customers and staff, burning into her back. Mr. Harrison stood near the bar, arms crossed, his eyes locked onto her like a predator waiting to pounce. The muscles in his jaw worked furiously, and his face was flushed with barely suppressed anger. Mary straightened her shoulders, a small act of defiance, and focused on her job. Enjoy your meal, she said softly, before turning to leave, but she didn't make it far. Mary! Mr. Harrison's voice rang out sharply, cutting through the hushed conversations like a thunderclap. She stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs, and slowly turned to face him. The entire restaurant went silent. Forks paused mid-air, conversations died abruptly, and all eyes landed on them. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the clinking of ice in glasses. Come with me, he ordered, his face devoid of emotion, but his eyes flashing with barely contained rage. Mary swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making it difficult to breathe, but followed him toward the back of the restaurant, where the staff usually gathered for briefings. The moment they were alone, he shut the door with a sharp click and turned to her, his face contorted with fury. What do you think you're doing? He demanded, his voice low but full of barely contained rage. Mary frowned, confusion mixing with her fear. I'm doing my job. Mr. Harrison let out a bitter, humorless chuckle. Your job is to uphold the reputation of this restaurant. Do you have any idea how many important clients are here today? And you're serving him as if he's a VIP? She blinked, bewildered. He is a customer. I treat everyone with respect, no matter what they look like. His face darkened, his eyes narrowing into slits. You don't get to decide that. I do. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more, his breath hot on her face. Do you know who's sitting at table 5? A billionaire investor. Table 3? A famous politician. And instead of focusing on them, You're bending over backward for some nobody who probably can't even afford the tip. Mary's blood boiled. A wave of righteous anger surged through her. How can you say that? You don't even know him. Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck bulging. I don't need to know him. I know what he looks like, and I know what kind of place this is. We don't serve his kind here. Mary took a step back, disgusted by his blatant prejudice. His kind? Mr. Harrison smirked, a cruel, condescending twist of his lips. Oh, don't act so righteous. You think the owners of this place care about equality? They care about money. And the customers with real money don't want to sit next to someone like him. Mary clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. So what are you saying? I should have ignored him, like everyone else? I'm saying you shouldn't have served him at all. His voice was cold, hard as granite. And because you did, you're fired. The words hit her like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of her. What? She whispered, barely believing what she was hearing. You heard me. You can pack your things and leave. Now. Mary's breath caught in her throat. She looked past him, through the small glass panel that separated the kitchen from the dining area. The man was still sitting at his table, calmly eating his food, unaware of the chaos unfolding just a few feet away. Her mind raced. She needed this job. The rent was due. Her mother's medical bills were piling up, higher than the skyscrapers outside. She couldn't afford to lose this. Mr. Harrison, please, she said, forcing herself to stay calm, to plead for her livelihood. No. He shook his head, cutting her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. I don't want excuses. I don't want arguments. I want you out. And if you make a scene, I'll make sure no restaurant in this city hires you again. Her stomach twisted into a knot. She had no power here, no leverage, no way to fight back. Taking a shaky breath, she nodded, her head drooping in defeat. Fine, she murmured. She turned, walking toward the small, cramped locker room, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She could feel the eyes of the other staff on her, some pitying, some indifferent, some even smug. Sarah ran up to her, grabbing her arm, her face etched with concern. Mary, what happened? She whispered urgently. I got fired, Mary said, barely able to get the words out, her voice choked with emotion. Sarah's eyes widened. What? Why? Mary shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. Because I treated a customer like a human being. Sarah's face twisted with anger, but before she could say anything, Mr. Harrison stepped into the kitchen and barked, Hurry up, Mary. You're wasting time. Mary grabbed her small, worn bag from her locker and pulled off her apron, the fabric feeling rough against her trembling hands. With one last, lingering glance at the restaurant she had spent 2 years working in, she squared her shoulders, a flicker of defiance rekindling in her heart, and walked out. The cold air outside hit her like a slap in the face, a brutal reminder of her new reality. For a moment, she just stood there, stunned, her mind reeling. She had no job, no backup plan, no idea what to do next. And yet, as she looked up at the cloudy New York sky, a strange feeling washed over her. Relief. Because she knew one thing for certain. She had done the right thing. What she didn't know was that inside the restaurant, the man she had served, Mohamed Salah, had watched everything unfold. And he wasn't going to let this injustice go unanswered. Something big was about to happen, and Mary had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Mary walked down the busy streets of New York, her thoughts a chaotic jumble. She still couldn't believe what had happened. 1 minute, she was just another waitress, trying to make it through her shift. The next, she was unemployed, humiliated, and uncertain about how she was going to pay her bills. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. There were no missed calls, No job offers waiting for her. Just a text message from Sarah. Sarah, I can't believe this. It's not fair. Are you okay? Mary let out a bitter laugh, a hollow, empty sound. Okay? She had just been fired in front of an entire restaurant full of people. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was the one who had to suffer. She stared at her screen, debating whether to answer, but before she could type a response, another message popped up. Sarah. Mary, do you know who that guy was? Mary frowned. What kind of question was that? Mary. What do you mean? Sarah. Go check the news. Right now. Mary's heart pounded. What was Sarah talking about? With trembling fingers, she opened her browser and typed in Restaurant Incident NYC. The first result made her stop dead in her tracks. Mohamed Salah humiliated in upscale NYC restaurant. Waitress fired for treating him with respect. Her breath caught in her throat. Mohamed Salah? As in, the Mohamed Salah. The world-famous footballer? The man she had served, the one she had been fired for treating with kindness, was one of the most well-known athletes on the planet. Mary felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. She clicked on the article, her eyes scanning the words frantically. In a shocking incident at an upscale New York restaurant, football superstar Mohamed Salah was reportedly mistreated by management, and a waitress was fired for simply serving him with dignity. Witnesses say that Salah, known for his humility and generosity, was ignored by most of the staff, except for one employee, Mary Johnson, who treated him with the same respect as any other guest. Her actions were met with hostility from the restaurant's manager, who proceeded to fire her in front of everyone. The news has since gone viral, with thousands of fans expressing outrage over the incident. Mary's hands shook as she read further. The article included quotes from customers who had witnessed the scene. Some had even recorded videos, which were now circulating online. The restaurant's name was trending on social media, for all the wrong reasons. People were furious. The comment section was filled with messages of support for Mary and disgust for the restaurant. This is disgusting. How can a place like this still be in business? Mary Johnson deserves a better job. Someone hire her immediately. Mohamed Salah is a legend, and she was the only one who treated him with respect. This manager should be ashamed. Mary's head was spinning. She had no idea how quickly the situation had escalated. She had just been worried about paying rent. Now, the entire world seemed to know her name. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. Sarah, he's looking for you. Mary's heart nearly stopped. Mary. Who? Sarah. Salah. He's trying to find you. He wants to talk. Mary read the message 3 times, trying to process what it meant. Mohamed Salah, one of the biggest names in football, was looking for her? Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Sarah. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Mary Johnson? A woman's voice asked. Yes, that's me. This is Karen Smith. I work with Mohamed Salah. He asked me to reach out to you. Mary's stomach flipped. He did? Yes. He saw what happened and was very upset about how you were treated. He would like to meet with you, if you're open to it. Mary's pulse raced. This couldn't be real. Why would someone like him want to meet her? She was just a waitress. Well, a former waitress. She struggled to form words. I understand this might be overwhelming, Karen continued, her voice calm and reassuring. But Salah believes in standing up for what's right. He was really impressed by how you handled the situation. He wants to talk to you in person. Mary swallowed hard. Was this really happening? Where would we meet? He's staying at the Four Seasons in Manhattan. Would you be comfortable coming by tomorrow morning? Mary hesitated. This was all moving so fast. Less than 24 hours ago, she was just another struggling worker in New York. Now she was being invited to meet one of the biggest football stars in the world. But deep down, she knew she couldn't say no. This was bigger than her. Yes, she finally said, her voice a little shaky. I'll be there. Karen gave her the details, and they ended the call. Mary stood there for a long time, gripping her phone, staring at the city lights, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had lost everything in one moment, and in the next, the world had opened a door she never could have imagined. Tomorrow she would meet Mohamed Salah, and she had no idea what awaited her. The next morning, Mary stood outside the luxurious Four Seasons Hotel, gripping the strap of her worn-out purse, trying to calm the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. The hotel's golden revolving doors reflected the bright morning sun, and every inch of the place felt like another world, a world she felt she didn't belong to. She took a deep, steadying breath, a trick her mother had taught her, and stepped inside. The lobby was breathtaking, marble floors that gleamed like polished glass, crystal chandeliers that sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars, and people dressed in suits that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. Mary felt the weight of every stare, every subtle glance, as she approached the reception desk. The feeling of being an outsider was palpable, a heavy cloak she couldn't shake off. I'm here to meet Karen Smith, she said, her voice quieter than she intended, almost a whisper. The receptionist, a woman with impeccably styled hair and a perfectly neutral expression, gave a professional nod and picked up the phone. Moments later, a tall woman in an elegant black dress walked towards her, a warm, welcoming smile gracing her features. Mary, it's so nice to meet you, she said, extending her hand. I'm Karen. Come with me. Mary followed her through the hotel, her heart pounding with every step. This was surreal. How had her life changed so drastically in just one day? Each footstep echoed the rapid beat of her heart. They reached a private lounge, a secluded oasis of calm, away from the bustling lobby. Karen held the door open for her, and there he was. Mohamed Salah sat on a plush couch, dressed casually in a dark hoodie and jeans. His presence filled the room, a quiet energy that radiated from him. But his expression was nothing like the arrogance she had seen in so many wealthy customers before. He looked up and smiled, a genuine, open smile that instantly put her at ease. Mary, he said, standing to greet her, his voice warm and friendly. It's good to finally meet you. Mary could barely breathe. The reality of the situation hit her with full force. I don't know what to say, she stammered, her cheeks flushing with a mix of nervousness and awe. Salah gestured for her to sit on the couch opposite him. I think I should be the one saying something first, he said. He leaned forward, his tone calm but serious, his eyes filled with a sincerity that touched her deeply. I saw everything that happened yesterday, and I saw how you stood up for me, when no one else did. Mary shook her head, a wave of humility washing over her. I just did what anyone should do. You were a customer. It wasn't right, the way they treated you. Salah smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes, a knowing look that spoke of shared experiences. Unfortunately, I've seen this before. It happens more often than people realize, he said, his voice tinged with a quiet resignation. He exhaled slowly, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of countless similar encounters. But what you did, it mattered. Mary wasn't sure what to say. All she had done was treat him with kindness, something that should have been normal, not extraordinary. She had simply acted on her deeply ingrained values, the ones her mother had instilled in her since childhood. Salah continued, his voice gaining strength. I can't change what happened at that restaurant, but I can do something about what happens next. Mary's brow furrowed, a question forming in her eyes. What do you mean? He leaned back, crossing his arms, a thoughtful expression on his face. I don't believe people like you should be punished for doing the right thing. So, I'd like to help you. Her heart skipped a beat. Help her? How? A whirlwind of possibilities spun through her mind. Salah exchanged a glance with Karen, who nodded in affirmation before speaking. We have connections with several restaurant owners in the city who believe in treating their employees with respect and dignity. If you're open to it, we can introduce you to some opportunities that might be a better fit for you. Places where your values align with theirs. Mary's chest tightened. You mean a job? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, hope flickering in her heart like a candle in the wind. Salah nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. A better job. One where you won't be treated like you're disposable, where your kindness and integrity will be valued, not punished. Mary's throat felt dry. Yesterday, she had walked out of that restaurant feeling like her life was falling apart, her future bleak and uncertain. And now, she was sitting in front of one of the most famous athletes in the world, being offered a way out of the nightmare she had been trapped in for years, a chance at a new beginning. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, threatening to spill over, but she blinked them away, determined to maintain her composure. I don't know what to say, she whispered, overwhelmed by his generosity. Salah smiled gently. Say yes. Mary let out a small, shaky laugh, a release of pent-up tension and anxiety. Yes, she said, nodding, her voice gaining strength. Yes, I'd love that. Karen clapped her hands together, her face beaming. Great! I'll set up some meetings for you right away. Mary turned back to Salah, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. His expression softened, his eyes reflecting a deep empathy. Because I know what it's like to be underestimated, he said, his voice low and sincere. And I know what it's like to prove people wrong. He gave her a knowing look, a spark of understanding passing between them. I have a feeling you're going to do just that. Emma felt a lump in her throat. She wasn't just being given a job. She was being given a chance, an opportunity to prove that kindness still mattered in a world that often overlooked it. A world that often prioritized profit over people. And she wasn't going to waste it. Tomorrow, a new chapter in her life would begin, and this time, she was walking into it on her own terms, her head held high, her spirit unbroken. The next morning, Mary found herself standing outside a sleek, modern restaurant in downtown Manhattan. The name, The Golden Harvest, gleamed in elegant gold letters above the entrance. It was one of the most renowned fine dining establishments in the city, a place known for its exquisite cuisine and impeccable service. She took a deep breath, gripping the strap of her bag, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. Less than 48 hours ago, she had been fired and humiliated in front of an entire restaurant. Now, thanks to Mohamed Salah's incredible act of kindness, she was about to step into a job interview that could change her life forever. The glass doors slid open automatically as she stepped inside. The air was filled with the enticing aroma of freshly baked bread, seared meat, and delicate herbs, a symphony of scents that tantalized her senses. The atmosphere was welcoming, yet sophisticated. Polished wood floors, warm, inviting lighting, and a quiet hum of conversation. A man in a crisp white chef's uniform approached her with a warm, genuine smile. "You must be Mary?" he asked. She nodded, her heart beating a little faster. "Yes, sir." "I'm Chef David," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Mohammed told me about what happened. I must say, I admire the way you handled yourself." Mary felt a flicker of warmth, a sense of validation, at his words. "I just treated someone the way I would want to be treated," she replied, her voice steady and confident. "And that," he said, leading her toward a quiet corner of the restaurant, "is exactly the kind of person we want here." They sat down, and the interview began. Chef David didn't just ask about her experience. He asked about her values. He asked how she handled difficult customers, how she stayed calm under pressure, how she treated her coworkers. He delved deeper, seeking to understand not just her skills, but her character. Mary answered honestly, openly sharing her experiences. She told him about the difficult nights, the unfair rules, the exhausting shifts. But she also spoke about the satisfaction of serving a meal with care, the joy of making someone's day a little brighter, the simple pleasure of connecting with people through food. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a half hour, Chef David finally smiled, a broad, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You're hired," he said. Mary blinked, momentarily stunned. I am?" He nodded. "We need people like you, Mary. People with heart and integrity. You'll start as a senior waitress. If you work hard, there's room to grow, to move up the ladder." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of newfound hope. A real opportunity, a fresh start, a chance to rebuild her life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the team," Chef David said warmly, extending his hand again. She left the restaurant with a weight lifted from her shoulders, a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in years. She had a new job, one that valued her, one that respected her. She couldn't wait to tell her mother, to share the good news with Sarah. But as she stepped outside, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering, a flicker of apprehension in her heart. "Hello, Mary Johnson?" a deep, familiar voice asked. Her heart nearly stopped. "Mr. Harrison?" There was a long silence, followed by a nervous chuckle, a sound that grated on her nerves. "Mary, listen. I think we should talk." Mary's fingers tightened around the phone. Talk? After everything he had put her through? I saw what's happening online," he continued, his voice shifting between nervousness and forced confidence. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we can—" "No." The word left her lips before she even thought about it, sharp and decisive, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Excuse me?" he stammered, clearly taken aback by her blunt refusal. "I said no." Her voice was steady now, strong, filled with a newfound confidence. "There's no misunderstanding. You fired me in front of the entire restaurant. You made it clear how you saw me. Now that people know the truth, you suddenly want to talk?" Mr. Harrison stammered, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Mary, let's not be hasty. You know how things get taken out of context online." Mary exhaled slowly, a sense of calm settling over her. A few days ago, she might have hesitated. She might have listened. She might have even been tempted to take him up on his offer, desperate as she was. But not anymore. "I've already moved on," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "And you should too." Then, without waiting for another word, she hung up. She wasn't the same Mary who had walked into that restaurant 2 days ago, afraid of losing everything. She had lost something, but she had gained so much more. Self-respect, confidence, and a future filled with hope. And this was just the beginning. Mary couldn't stop smiling as she walked back home. For the first time in a long time, she felt like things were finally falling into place. She had a new job, one that valued her. She had stood up for herself, refusing to let Mr. Harrison manipulate her. And somehow, miraculously, Mohamed Salah had been the catalyst for it all. When she got home, her mother was sitting on the couch, sipping tea, her frail hands wrapped around the warm mug. She looked up, her tired but warm eyes filled with a familiar worry. "You're smiling," her mother said, tilting her head, a hint of surprise in her voice. "That's a rare sight these days." Mary chuckled as she sat beside her, the warmth of her mother's presence a comforting balm. "Mom, I got a new job. Her mother's eyes widened. What? Where? Mary hesitated, then grinned, unable to contain her excitement. At the Golden Harvest. The teacup nearly slipped from her mother's hands. Mary, that's one of the best restaurants in the city. I know, she said, barely able to believe it herself. And they wanted me. They didn't just take me in because I needed a job. They hired me because they saw my worth. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, tears of joy and relief. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. Mary squeezed her hand. And there's more. Her mother frowned, a questioning look on her face. More? Mary took a deep breath. The reason all of this happened, the reason I got fired, and why I even got this opportunity, it's because of Mohamed Salah. Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The football player? Mary nodded. Yes, he was the man I served that day. I didn't recognize him at first, but after everything that happened, he found me. He wanted to make sure I was okay, and he's the reason I got this new job. Her mother covered her mouth in shock, speechless for a moment. That's unbelievable, she finally managed to say. Mary let out a small laugh. Tell me about it. Her mother suddenly sat up straighter, a new thought dawning on her. Wait, if this story is out there, does that mean, as if on cue, Mary's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Another unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Mary Johnson? A cheerful voice asked. My name is John Davis, and I'm a journalist from the New York Times. Her stomach flipped. The New York Times? We'd love to interview you about your experience and the incredible way Mohamed Salah stepped in to help, he continued. Would you be open to that? Mary's head spun. She had never expected any of this. An interview with the New York Times? She glanced at her mother, who was watching with wide eyes, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. This wasn't just a personal story anymore. It was bigger than her. It was about respect, dignity, and how one small act of kindness could change a life, could ripple outwards and touch countless others. Mary took a deep breath, a sense of purpose filling her. Yes, she said firmly. I'd love to share my story. And just like that, the world was about to hear the truth. The next morning, Mary found herself sitting across from a journalist in a quiet cafe, a small recorder sitting on the table between them, its red light blinking steadily, capturing her every word. So, Mary, John began, adjusting his notepad. Tell me, when you first served Mohamed Salah, did you have any idea who he was? Mary let out a soft laugh, a trace of embarrassment in her voice. Not at all. To me, he was just another customer. But unlike most people in that restaurant, he was kind. He didn't act entitled. He was just real. John nodded, scribbling notes. And when your manager fired you, did you think this moment, this interview, would ever happen? Mary shook her head, a wistful smile playing on her lips. I thought my life was over. I had no idea that one small moment, one simple act of respect, would turn into something so big. John leaned forward, his gaze intense. And now, how do you feel, knowing that millions of people have heard your story? Mary hesitated, looking down at her hands, her fingers intertwined. The last few days had been a whirlwind, a roller coaster of emotions. But in this moment, she knew exactly how she felt. I feel grateful, she said finally, her voice clear and strong. Not just because I got a new job, but because this story showed people something important. That how we treat others matters. That kindness matters. John smiled. And what about Mohamed Salah? What would you say to him if he were here right now? Mary looked up, her eyes shining with sincerity and gratitude. I'd say thank you, not just for helping me, but for showing me that doing the right thing is always worth it. The interview ended, and as Mary walked out into the crisp New York morning, the sun shining brightly on her face, she knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of her journey, and she would never again doubt the power of kindness, the power of standing up for what's right, the power of one person to make a difference. Life has a way of rewarding those who stand up for what's right, those who choose kindness over cruelty, respect over prejudice. Mary's story is proof that kindness, respect, and integrity always win in the end. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit, to our capacity for resilience and triumph. And you? What would you have done in her place? Would you have had the courage to stand up for what's right, even if it meant risking everything? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories, your experiences matter. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and move the heart. Stories that remind us of the good in the world, of the power of human connection. Because the next life-changing moment might be just around the corner, and you won't want to miss it. God bless you.